Hello and welcome back. Our first story is called Dead in the Water. There is a small village on the island of Hawaii called Ola'a. Nobody would ever guess the terrible secret this village holds, following the accidental drowning of a young boy many years ago. Today, the tragedy still haunts the villagers and their children. Back in 1947, a group of kids were playing on the banks of a deep pond outside the village. One boy accidentally tripped over a log and fell into the water with a splash. Before any of the other children could react, the boy sank beneath the water's shimmering surface. For a few moments they waited for him to resurface, but there was no sign of him. Horrified, they ran back to the village to get help. Some local men came as fast as they could and dived into the pond, searching for the young boy. They were terrified by what they found. The boy was sitting on a rock at the very bottom of the pond. His arms were hanging down by his sides and his body was swaying back and forth with the currents. His eyes were wide and his mouth was hanging open, but he was dead in the water. The eerie sight sent shivers down the spines of the men who had dived in to save him. They were deeply disturbed and said it was such an unusual way to drown. It was as if the boy had calmly sat down on the rock and waited there to die. They retrieved the corpse and dragged it onto the bank of the pond. Everyone who lived in the village was saddened by the tragedy, but after the funeral, they tried to put the strange death behind them. Afterwards, bizarre rumors began to spread around the area. In the middle of the night, villagers would hear unexplained screams and cries coming from the direction of the pond. At first, they tried to tell themselves that the haunting cries were just caused by the wind blowing through the tall trees. However, as time went on, some people started to report disturbing experiences. Whenever people walked past the pond at night, they would feel something reaching out and trying to grab their feet. Many villagers believed that the ghost of the drowned boy lurked beneath the dark waters of the pond. They said that, at night, he would come to the surface, cold, wet and shivering, his icy hands clutching at unsuspecting victims and trying to pull them into his watery grave. According to the rumors, he was trapped in this world by accident, and the only way he could escape was to find someone else to take his place at the bottom of the pond. One day, a boy was out walking with his father. When they passed by the haunted pond, the boy picked up some stones and skimmed them across the surface of the water. Suddenly, the boy screamed out in terror. Something was holding his leg and dragging him into the pond. The boy clawed at the earth, trying to hold on, but it was no use. Before his father had a chance to grab hold of him, the boy was pulled down into the watery depths. The desperate father jumped into the pond and tried to find his son, but there was no trace of him. Minutes later, he dived deeper and finally located the young boy. He was sitting on a rock on the bottom of the pond, arms placidly at his side, eyes and mouth wide open, swaying gently to and fro in the current. The father grasped his son and pulled him up to the surface. He made his way to the edge of the pond, dragging his son behind him like a dead weight. Luckily, the father had taken some courses in first aid, and there, on the bank, he was able to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on his son. The man did everything he could, and finally, just when he was about to give up, he saw his son's chest rise and fall, and the boy coughed up all the water in his lungs. The boy was alive. After that, all of the parents in the village warned their children to stay away from the pond. A priest was brought in to bless the waters, and the local people felt that would put an end to the haunting. However, on particularly dark nights, when the evening skies were as black as ink, those who lived closest to the pond claimed that they could still hear the boy's terrifying screams. Some say that he will never find peace. Nowadays, nobody dares to venture close to the pond, and every child in the village knows the story of the drowned boy. No one knows when the ghost will once again grow restless and try to claim another young life. This one is called The Girl in the Photograph. One day, a boy was sitting in his classroom in school. He was extremely bored and was waiting for the school bell to ring. When he looked out the window, something caught his eye. There was a photograph lying on the grass outside. When school was over, he ran outside and picked up the photograph before anyone else had a chance to see it. Turning it over in his hands, he realized it was a picture of an incredibly beautiful girl. She was wearing a white top, a short black skirt, black tights, and black shoes. For some reason, she was holding up 2 fingers. The girl was so pretty that he wanted to meet her. He showed the photograph to everyone in the school and asked if they knew her. Unfortunately, nobody recognized her. That night, when he went to bed, he placed the photo on his bedside table and went to sleep. Around midnight, he woke up. There was something tapping on his window. Then he heard what sounded like someone giggling. More than a little frightened, he worked up the courage to investigate it. He jumped out of bed, went over to the window, and opened it. There was nothing there. The next day, he showed the photo to his friends and neighbors and asked if they knew the mysterious girl. Everybody he asked said they had never seen the girl before in their lives. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard the tapping sound again. He looked out the window and could just make out a figure standing on the other side of the street. He couldn't be sure, but it looked like the mysterious girl in the photograph. Clutching the picture tightly, he threw on his clothes and raced downstairs and out the front door. As he crossed the road, he forgot to look both ways and was suddenly hit by a car. The driver got out of the car and ran over to help the boy, but it was no use. The boy had been killed on impact. The driver noticed something clutched in the boy's hand. It was a photograph. Turning it over in his hands, the driver realized it was a picture of an incredibly beautiful girl. She was wearing a black top, a short black skirt, black tights, and black shoes. For some reason, she was holding up 3 fingers. This story is called Twist Ending. There was a very famous author named David, who had written quite a few best-selling horror novels. All of the literary critics praised his talent for plot twists and surprise endings. He received a large amount of fan mail every day, and some budding authors even sent him manuscripts in the hopes that he would help them get their work published. While David took pleasure in responding to letters from his fans, he took even more pleasure in stealing the ideas of amateur writers. If he came across a manuscript with a great idea for a scary story, he would use it in one of his own books and deny the author any credit. Then, in order to hide his theft, he pulled some strings with his friends in the publishing industry to make sure that the original author never got anything published in the future. One day, David received a new manuscript in the mail. It was bound in a beautiful hardcover book. He read the first chapter and felt that he knew how the story would end. As he continued reading, he became more and more certain that he could guess the twist ending. It was growing late, but he wanted to finish reading the manuscript to see whether or not he was right. When David came to the final chapter, he realized that the last few pages of the book were stuck together. Anxious to read further, he pulled the pages apart. He felt increasingly tired, but he still kept reading. Finally, he came to the end of the book. It was exactly the twist ending he had anticipated. The husband had hanged himself just as his wife was committing suicide in the next room. David made a mental note to steal the idea and use it in his next story. Just then he noticed that after the words, "the end," there was a little handwritten comment from the author. It read, "I already know that you are planning to steal the ideas in this story. I know because you did the exact same thing to me the last time I sent you a manuscript. You published it under your own name and didn't give me any credit. You ripped me off and blacklisted me in the industry. Nobody will accept my novels anymore, and I will never again be able to publish anything I write. You've ruined my life, and now I am going to have my revenge. You had to pull apart the back pages in order to read this, didn't you? Well, those pages contained a poison. Arsenic, to be precise. Are you feeling tired? That is normal. It's one of the symptoms of arsenic poisoning. Soon your heartbeat will get slower and slower until it eventually stops permanently. Don't bother trying to call an ambulance. You will be dead before they arrive. You have already been exposed for too long. Goodbye, David. Some twist endings can be very hard to predict.